A bright flash appeared in the sky, its beam flying down and crushing the building beneath it. The city's loudspeaker warned of the opening of the last gate and the arrival of the Demon King. The voice said that their hero Baek Jin would fight him and urged all citizens to evacuate the epicenter of the battle. On the rubble of the building, a cloaked figure emerged from the beam. The cloak covered the skeleton's bare bones, which glowed with a blue glow, and the swordsman was already standing in front of him. The alien asked the stranger how he dared to stand against him alone, and whether he was not afraid of losing his life. Baek stood calmly and said that he had nothing to fear. Gripping his sword tighter and rushing into the attack, he said that he had not felt this fear for a long time. The skeleton repelled the attack with a magic shield, and the boy shouted that all he needed to do was kill it and close the last gate. He attacked again and again, but the shield absorbed every blow. The skeleton was laughing at his words, and with a single snap of his finger, he threw the hero into the wall, leaving a long crater on the ground. But the next moment, the swordsman was already delivering another blow, which managed to penetrate the shield and make a crack in the skeleton's skull. The boy said that the victory of the hero over the villain would be too simple a denouement. The enemy recognized his power, and recognized him as a hero of all mankind. The skeleton said that real glory awaited him, but the boy said in an indifferent voice that he did not care. Baek was immersed in memories. Another battle was over and many of them had died. A girl was dying in his arms, hoping that he would save the world because he was the chosen one. The chosen one sobbed over her body. No praise or gratitude for saving her in the future mattered to him. The duty entrusted to him, and hundreds of people's words about the need for him only pressured him even more. He held his sword to the enemy's skull, and said that although he was a warrior and a hero, he was exhausted. Baek suggested that they kill each other, and then he would finally be able to escape this fate. One way or another, he failed to protect the person he cared about most. He struck the bony man and his body began to dissipate in the wind. The magic of his bones was getting brighter and was about to explode. The boy had done his duty, and now he could die in peace. He closed his eyes and waited for the long-awaited end. Baek rejoiced that he no longer had to hold the sword in his hands, and darkness fell in his mind. But the darkness began to dissipate at the sound of someone's voice. Opening his eyes, he saw a gray-haired bearded man standing over him, happy that their little prince had woken up, and touching his cheek with his finger. The boy did not understand what was happening. He thought that a giant had attacked him. He tried to remember how everything ended with that last gate, but decided to kill the giant first. A small hand squeezed the giant's finger, and the man was glad that little Riley had such a strong grip. A blonde woman standing next to him said it was because he had been woken up. The boy saw the fragile hands in front of him, and did not believe that they were his. Maybe they were just his childhood memories, but for some reason, he was called Riley. The woman was also happy to see the boy's talents, and said that he was the son of the great swordsman Count Iplet. The dark-haired kid thought he was in some other world, and tried to understand the woman's words about a certain count. The next moment, a man in a coat and red tie came through the door. He addressed the boy and asked if he was ready to receive the blessing of the sword. The man was a master swordsman, and the child was his youngest son. Their family, the Iplets, was a family of great swordsmen. This blessing was an important and long-awaited ritual for each of their children. The adults had already seen the boy pick up a sword for the first time, and were happy to see him join the ranks of the masters. He would become the pride of his father, and some even asked if the sword was ready and polished for the kid. Listening to all this, the kid remembered how in his previous life he had promised himself never to pick up a weapon again, and now he was here, reborn in a family of sword masters. He shouted why he was being tortured, but all he could hear was a child's cry. The next moment, he saw 4 swords hovering over him and screamed, not realizing what they were doing. Hanging above the child was a rattle with real swords, the points of which were pointed directly at the child. A man from the staff enthusiastically declared that the kid seemed to like swords, and already wanted to take one in his hands. Riley screamed at these fools that he didn't like any of it and hated swords. He swore never to pick one up and would have been happy to die, but for some reason he was reborn with the memory of his past life. But all the adults saw and heard was their little lord crying. 19 years later, the county of Ippolito was about to elect a new heir. People in the tavern raised their glasses to the count's sons, 2 of whom were always with him. At first glance, their skill was noticeable. The elder lion followed the path of strength and was a famous monster fighter. The middle son, Lloyd, was so fast and agile that he could cut a drop of water in half in midair. One of the men over a drink asked about the third son, but his partner didn't even remember him, because he had grown up to be a nobody. Next to them, a gray-haired bearded man was enjoying his beer. The men continued to discuss the lazy son, who allegedly had no ability with a sword, although he reached for it at the moment of blessing. One of them said that it was probably just a fable, and that this nobody would never become anything in his lifetime. The gray-haired man was just finishing his beer and slammed his mug on the table. He asked his friends how they dared to talk about the count's son like that, but they said that everyone knew about his mediocrity and idleness. The bearded man denied their words and tried to assure them that he was actually training hard and had more potential than his brothers. At that moment, the adult Riley was lying under a tree and enjoying its shade. He looked up at the sky and saw a hamburger in the cloud. He liked this world, but there was no time for that here either. The bearded man continued to prove to the 2 boys that the one who was so badly remembered was actually trying his best and was a very honest person. At that moment, Riley was still thinking about the Coke. He had been feeling nostalgic lately and was remembering his past life. The boy believed that with a certain age, he would forget everything. His past version at the same age could not even imagine his future. He was then accidentally able to lift the sacred sword, which was not possible for others. From that moment on, he had to save humanity from the Demon King, and from that moment on, he could no longer be himself. Then he became a warrior, and it was his inevitable destiny, which is why he was not going to touch a weapon under any circumstances in this life. A bearded man had just found him and asked if he had been training with a sword, reminding him that the heir would soon be chosen and other families would be invited to the ceremony. But the boy said he had no reason to try. He was already considered an extra lazy son. The gray-haired man asked if the boy knew about the rumors. Why didn't he want to prove them wrong? But the boy just replied that they were right. The man continued to try to convince him, and was concerned about his reputation, but he told him not to pay attention to people's chatter. Riley didn't care, because he had learned the hard way, and let Yang, the gray-haired bearded man's name, live as long as he did, and then he would understand. Yin grabbed hold of his strong head, and said that the young gentleman was only 19 years old. They returned to the estate at lunchtime. Jan approached the countess, who was having lunch, and tried to tell her that the boy needed to train because of the upcoming choice of heir. He would have to compete with his brothers for a place, and water does not flow under a lying stone. The mother agreed that her youngest son deserved to be the heir. Their family was famous for the greatest swordsman, and he was the son of the great Finn Ippolita. The boy looked at her and realized that now she would also encourage him to take up arms. But the woman said that she wanted her son to be happy. She wanted him to not be burdened by the fate of his family, and to choose his own path. Riley was delighted with her words, but Ian, on the contrary, thought that something was wrong with them both. He asked the lady if her younger son's behavior made her angry, because there was a big difference between the brothers' efforts. The mother replied that she had nothing to be angry about, and the boy kept telling him not to pay attention to other people's chatter. But the bearded man continued, reminding him how smart Riley was, because he started talking when he was 1 year old. He had seen a lot in his 60 years, but he considered the boy to be the most talented in the family. The boy learned to read early, and chose only the most difficult books. The mother replied that children with a penchant for science usually chose the pen over the sword, But the bearded man reminded him that they were the great family of swordsmen and begged him to take his side and influence the boy. Riley was enjoying their argument. He was fine with it. The old man and his mother still loved him for who he was, and he would never have to hold a sword. But the next moment, his carefree thoughts were interrupted by his mother's coughing, and there was blood on her arm. Yin rushed to her side, but the woman only whispered her son's name and fell down. The woman continued to cough up blood, and the boy didn't understand why this had to happen. They were doing so well, and he didn't have to grab for his weapon. Riley heard someone whispering behind him. He was sure it was someone who was happy with the situation. A red-haired woman peeked out from behind the door with a smile on her lips. She was Orly, his father's first wife. Ian shouted that the blood had finally stopped. The boy told him to leave his mother with him and run for a doctor, but he did not understand how Riley could help her. The boy recalled how he had read all the medical treatises. When he was 5 years old, he could give her first aid and take her to the hospital. The man promised to find a doctor as soon as possible, and the boy asked him to bring his wooden sword with him, which surprised the old man. Riley brought his mother to the room and tried to bring down the fever with a cold compress. He did everything he could for her. Jan came running with a doctor, and he began to examine the woman. He said that she had been poisoned, but the dose was not fatal, and there was a chance that she would recover. Now her life was not in danger, and the boy and the old man breathed a sigh of relief. But Riley did not really believe his words, because the blood from his mother's mouth looked more than threatening. The boy asked the old man if he thought what he did, and the old man agreed that it looked like an attempted murder. The maid who served them the food had already been arrested and was about to be interrogated, but they didn't know anything yet. The man bowed and apologized to the boy, saying that he should have been more attentive and noticed some details. Riley asked him if he remembered his stories about the other world that the boy sometimes dreamed about. He threw his wooden sword over his shoulder and said that it was not worth waking up evil while it slept. The boy said that he needed to talk to someone right now, and he asked the old man to look after his mother. He walked down the corridors and remembered his mother's smiling face. The boy remembered how in this life he only wanted to live carefree with the only person he cared about. But someone dared to encroach on her, and it was worth taking up the sword again. Riley found the red-haired woman, and he picked up the sword not as a warrior or a hero, and not for good at all, but for his only desire. The woman looked back at him with disdain, but the next moment she was happily inquiring about his business, mockingly calling him the master of the lazy sword. The boy replied that he was doing well, and thanks to her, not only he was. He and his mother would like to repay the kindness. But Orly continued the game, saying that she was the owner of the castle, and it was her duty to take care of everyone. The woman was very worried about Iris, the boy's mother, because everyone was laughing at him and spreading bad rumors. But now she could see positive changes, because the boy had finally picked up a sword, albeit a wooden one. Riley said that he had really started to change, and asked about the flavor of the soup that was served for lunch, and what he had smelled from the woman. Orly praised his keen sense of smell, and said she had been in the kitchen that morning, and the boy noticed that it didn't sound like her. The woman said that the same could be said for him. She advised him to sit in the corner, and not come out, and just keep doing what he always did. In the evening, Orly asked the maid she had sent to watch him about the boy. The man said that after talking to her, he went to practice with his sword, but it was obvious that he didn't even know how to hold it properly. The woman mockingly replied that one would not expect anything else from a lazy sword master. She ordered the man in the cloak to finish what he had started tonight, and to do it quietly. The masked man thought that perhaps the boy, who seemed so unconcerned then, actually realized that he was being watched and was patiently waiting for his next move. The woman asked him why he had gotten up and ordered him to follow the order. He headed down the corridor. Riley's room was around the corner. But the next moment, a boy was waiting for him, swinging a wooden sword. Riley said he couldn't wait for him, his eyes glowing like a demon's. The mercenary wondered how the boy had managed to conceal his presence, and as he dodged the blow, he was sure of his previous clumsiness. But he was surprised to see a sinkhole in the stone floor of the palace. Meanwhile, the boy was shouting at him to wake up, because he was inattentive. He flew at him with a sword and asked if he was here on Orla's orders, but if not, she had wasted a lot of money. Because such a fool is not able to resist even a wooden sword, which the boy used to knock the weapon out of his hands and hit the unarmed enemy with the next blow. In the morning, Yang woke the young master up and told him that a dead body had been found in the mansion. The boy said that he shouldn't have woken him up for such a trifle. But the bearded man assured him that although his father had many enemies, this was a special case. Not just a corpse was found, but the corpse of an assassin who had somehow entered the castle. He was lying near Mrs. Orley's door with a broken neck. Ian said that the news of Lady Iris's poisoning had been passed on to the Count, and he praised the boy for helping her. But the bearded man was now worried about his safety, because there might be other murderers in the castle, and the old man was not sure that the boy would be able to defend himself. Closing the book he had fallen asleep on, Riley said he would take care of himself and asked not to leave his mother. He handed the old man a list of herbs whose medicinal decoction would help her. At the old man's surprised look, he replied that he could do more than just be idle and asked Jan to go to his mother, and he would be there as soon as he had taken care of some things. A bloody sword lay beside the bed, and the assassin's dagger gleamed. Sitting in his chair, the Count asked his two older sons about the results of the searches of the palace, but they found no one. He reflected that it was incredibly arrogant of him to come to the house of the sword masters unarmed, but it was also possible that someone had helped him. Judging by his clothes, he was from the Guild of Thieves or Assassins. The father told his sons to check out the village of Yipa first. Behind them on the couch, Orly was sitting and eavesdropping, nervously biting her finger glove. The woman did not understand where the mercenary's dagger had gone. Meanwhile, Riley woke up from his afternoon nap under a tree and asked the old man, who had just come in, how his mother was doing. The woman felt much better after taking his medicine, but the man was still worried about the boy's training and demanded that he finally take up the sword, because swinging it a few times and surrendering would not be enough. Riley laid down on his back under the tree and said that losing is also a good thing, and he could fight with a branch. The boy asked the old man to get some fruit from the tree for them, but the man said that they had plenty of fruit and could be served at any time. But when the old man looked up, he noticed a metallic sheen on the fruit. Noticing his interest, the boy asked him if he wanted some fresh fruit too. But the old man replied that now was not the time for them, and took a stone and knocked the metal object off the tree. The man caught a dagger in his hand. Its symbolism was the same as on the assassin's scabbard. The boy asked where it came from, pretending to be surprised. In the night city, two men met in a carriage. The red-bearded man asked the cloaked assassin about the third, how he died, and whether he committed suicide. The other man did not know how he died, but he said that his partner's body remained in the castle. The red-bearded man said that Lady Orla might be in trouble, and ordered the Furman to take the road to the village of Ipa. The hooded man asked if the bearded man was going to act alone, to which he replied that they should not be noticed, and that they had to do everything quickly. He had to help his daughter. The next day, Lady Orly could not find a place to sit. She cursed the fool for losing her weapons, which Ian and Riley had already taken to the Count. The next moment there was a knock at her door. It was her son Lloyd, and she was afraid it was Riley. She asked her son why he had come, because he was very busy. Lloyd just wanted to make sure she was okay, because Assassin was found near her door. The son was worried that his mother did not look well, and he was glad she was resting. He said he would guard her room himself. Lloyd said that his grandfather's manufactory had moved to the village of Ipa. The woman asked if this was true, and the son said that these were the words of the servants who had recently returned from there, and it looked like a lot of workers had come. The woman thanked her son for the news and said that she was fine, so he could go. She wondered if the so-called workers already knew about the death of the third, the name of the dead assassin. And if her father had come too, it only meant that he had decided to end all problems in one fell swoop. The woman smiled and thought that in this case, Iris and her clumsy son would definitely not survive. Meanwhile, Riley continued to lie under his favorite tree, even though it was already night. Suddenly he heard someone whispering, voices discussing a plan. First, numbers 2, 4, and then 5 were to go first. The boy lay there thinking that they had decided to make their lives more interesting again. It seemed to him that the dagger he found would be enough to discourage them from going anywhere, but he would have to fight again. The assassins were making final preparations and were ready to move, sitting in a tree and finalizing their plan. Their goal was to steal the third's body to cover their tracks, one of them emphasizing the need to be careful and how all the residents of the estate were either current or former warriors. They were about to move when someone's voice asked them to wait. The three were immediately alert, and the man apologized for interrupting their important operation, but he had something to tell them. He had set them only one condition, that they should not get in his way and not invade the estate, and that he did not care about their other business. Leaving them time to think, the boy disappeared. One of the mercenaries asked if his partners had heard the same thing, but all the members of the guild had heard the statement. Another mercenary said that he hadn't heard anything about assassins in Iplet's family, and they were already considering canceling the operation. But their leader said they needed to end it once and for all. He would take the dagger himself, and numbers 2 through 9 would steal the body of their comrade. The others were to distract the residents of the estate, and if something went wrong, their task was not to leave any evidence and not to appear alive. 2 assassins stood in front of the door of someone's bedroom and discussed further actions. One of them said that even though the target was the Count's second wife, she might still have bodyguards. His partner said that they just had to do their job and stay hidden, and that it was a personal request from Lady Orley, and they couldn't leave without completing the task. He had heard that her son was so helpless that he didn't know which side of the sword to hold, so this was a good chance to get a promotion. The next moment, they were interrupted by Riley's voice, the boy reminding them of the ban on trespassing, and now they were in the wrong place. He stood in the middle of the corridor with a dagger and a rope, and since the boys had made their choice, it was his turn. The boy was pulling the rope with a smile, and asked them if they knew what adults do to naughty children. His partners were even glad to see him, because they didn't even have to look for this lazy sword master. They said that as a token of gratitude, he would get a quick death and attacked him. One attacked from behind, and the other seemed to be invisible. The boy let go of the rope, and the next moment one of the attackers froze. A dagger tied to the other end of the rope stabbed him right in the heart. His last thoughts were why he failed to notice the movement. Riley kept telling him that he shouldn't have crossed his path. Now they would die from the lazy sword master. The deceased's partner was surprised by such accuracy and one-hit killing, because they had been told that the target was weak. The boy was already waving a rope with a dagger at the end and said that he could hear them all, so let them come, but unfortunately they would not get out of the house alive. This enraged his partner, and he screamed at the guy, asking how dare he. His dagger was aimed at the neck, but the next moment Riley asked him to be quiet, and the attacker's hand and blade flew to the floor. The boy laughed at his great loss, and carelessly tossed the sword in his hand. The wounded man was panicking, and did not want to die like that, so he decided to run away, but the next moment a sword struck him in the back. Riley reminded him that he had warned them, and they had forced him to fight. When he finished, the boy took off his attacker's head in a leap. He said that he had hoped for an interesting fight, but the guys were worthless, and now he had to find the others. Yen and a short-haired maid stood back to back with their swords at the ready. The girl said that there were too many attackers, and asked how they got inside in such numbers. The gray-haired man rushed to the attack and shouted about their impudence to cross the threshold of his house. The man cut the 2 attackers in half with one blow and called them weaklings. The maid called out to the old man and said that she had already counted 15 on the way, and it looked like it was only going to get worse. Jan ordered them to fight to the end, and the girl decided to guard Lady Iris's room and let the old man find her son. The gray-bearded man ran down the corridor, thinking that the boy had always been good at hiding, and now he was sure to find a safe place. He just needed to wait for him. But the next moment, the enemy appeared in front of him. The assassin was slowly approaching with his hands in his pockets, and it was clear from his appearance that he was much stronger than the previous weaklings. Ian decided to politely ask him to get out of the way, and then he would stay alive. But this mercenary was not the most talkative, and immediately pulled out a dagger. The gray-bearded man emphasized that he did not have time for this, and rushed to attack. The mercenary easily deflected his blow, and leaped over the old man, attacking back. But his blade was also easily deflected. The old man said that he had no skills, and should not have entered Iplet's house with such skills. Jan struck with his sword, but the enemy slipped under it and rushed forward. The next moment, the blade entered the mercenary's shoulder. It was the weapon of one of his partners, and for some reason he failed to anticipate the attack. Meanwhile, the old man took advantage of the enemy's delay and stabbed him in the neck, and he fell to the floor. Yin remembered the young man and rushed to find him. Meanwhile, Riley stood there and didn't understand why he missed, because he was aiming for the heart. He thought that maybe it was because of the other body, and many years had passed, but he had done a good job. The boy decided to return to the image of a young aristocrat who did not know anything about the attack. Jan ran through the garden and called out to the boy, who responded sitting in one of the trees, and asked what the old man was doing here in the middle of the night. The man was glad that the young gentleman had been here all along, but now they had to leave together. The boy, as if surprised, asked if there was a new assassin. The gray-bearded man asked how he knew and explained the whole situation to him. Riley tried to show surprise, but he didn't have this skill in this world. The old man emphasized that in such dangerous times, it was better for a boy not to be alone. He and Sarah's mate had killed about 15 attackers on the way, but the boy was interested in what happened to his mother. Yang looked with tears in his eyes at the boy, who had been described as worthless and indifferent, but turned out to be very caring and only worried about his mother. The old man said that Sarah was guarding her chambers. She was a strong and brave girl, so they had nothing to worry about. They hurried inside and walked carefully through the corridors. The sword that Jan had warned him of the dangers was the sword of the Count himself. And while the old man was cautiously sneaking ahead, the boy was walking carefree behind him, and mentally telling him that everything was already clear. The man said that since the boy was the most vulnerable member of the family, he would be as careful as possible on the way, and asked the young gentleman to stay behind. Riley said he was grateful for the protection, and a second later took something out of his pocket. The boy said that the man must have seen something and pulled out a dirty piece of cloth and asked if this strange discovery could be related to the assassins. But the man just covered his nose and said that it looked like someone had wiped his nose with this handkerchief. The boy shouted that he might be lazy, but he wasn't dirty, and asked to take a closer look at the find. Ian picked it up with disgust and saw a recipe for soup poison. He thought he recognized the handwriting and was convinced of it with every word he read, but he thought it was impossible. Because, judging by the handwriting, it was Lady Airy who had attempted to assassinate Riley's mother. Meanwhile, the Count was walking through the library and said that the enemy was running from him, like all assassins, like a rat. When he found the mercenary, the man pulled out his sword and said that he couldn't handle him. The wounded assassin mentally agreed with him. Such a fight could be interesting if there were more of them, but now he was easy prey. He had already accomplished his task of getting the dagger and could now retreat. He needed to hold out for a few more minutes before the smoke screen activated. The Count rushed to attack and shouted that even if he begged on his knees, he would not spare him. The assassin only restrained his powerful blows and dodged. The Count activated the magic of electric charge, and his sword glowed in the discharges. He asked the enemy his last words. But Ian burst into the room, shouting that he knew who had attempted to assassinate Lady Iris. The Count's face was frozen with surprise. His first wife was standing next to Greybeard. The woman stood with a guilty look, and the man could not believe it. Jan asked who the man was standing next to his master, but he replied that this nobody did not matter, and he would kill him at any moment. The gray-bearded man held out a sheet with a prescription and asked the Count to look at it. He read out loud the list of ingredients, and the woman watched in fright. When he finished reading it, the Count looked at his wife with rage, because the handwriting was hers. The woman grabbed her head and began to sob. The boy, meanwhile, was lying on the floor in his mother's room, thinking that the old man must have delivered the note by now. This proof was to be the decisive one that would set the record straight. The next moment, Lady Iris woke up and saw her son on the floor and asked if he was all right. He told her about the attack and assured her that he was fine. She stroked his head and was happy that he was safe, and her son hugged her and was also happy that she was alive. This tender scene touched the warlike maid Sarah, and the next moment Yang was knocking on the door. He asked what his father had said about it, and whether the old man was right. The maid asked what he was talking about, and he told her that it was Lady Iris who had poisoned the soup. Iris's face was frozen with surprise. She asked if it was a joke, but it was her son who found the note with the culprit's handwriting. The woman still couldn't believe it and didn't understand her motives, and she fell to the floor in a fit of excitement. Although she knew she was hated, she did not expect this. The boy asked his mother to calm down and asked the old man what was wrong with his father. The man replied that he was having an interesting conversation with his wife, but they were joined by an unexpected guest. The assassin told Orla that everything was over and took off his hood. Although they got the dagger, they failed the task. The Count looked at the attacker's face in surprise. It was his wife's father, and now he understood why he was dodging. He asked how he could have disgraced his daughter like that. But Wari could not stand it. Clenching her fist, she shouted that the only one who had disgraced her was he. He had disgraced her when he took a second wife, when he became cold to her and kept his eyes on Iris. The Count interrupted her and told her not to talk nonsense, because all along she had only wanted his name. Even from the very beginning, when they married, he married her father's manufactory, not her. She was satisfied with this state of affairs, but now she has brought murderers into his house. So he has no right to say that he is to blame for anything, and let them both get out of his sight right now. The daughter and her father left the estate, and she complained that now everything was over. The woman would like to just wake up in her room and realize that it was just a dream. The father realized that this would happen sooner or later, and in a way, now he was relieved, and his daughter would somehow survive this blow. The man told her not to cry so much. Her sons would be better off than them. Their manufactory would continue to exist, and they would be able to start over. Nearby, someone was playing with a knife and throwing it in the air, and Wari was the first to notice it and call her father's attention. He asked what happened, and the next moment saw Riley with the blade. The boy asked if they enjoyed the fun. The man asked Riley what he was doing here, and he replied that he was here out of curiosity and revenge for his mother. He asked the furious lady what she thought about it, and she called him a premature bastard and the most worthless in the Eiplet family. She shouted how dare he talk to her like that, and swung to slap him. The boy asked in surprise what she was going to do, and how the Count would react if he came back beaten. The father told her to stop, and addressed the boy himself. He couldn't understand the confidence of such a small bastard, and was going to put him in his place by taking out a dagger. He called the other assassins, and asked him what made him think he would return home alive. The boy lazily cleaned his ear with his finger, and told his grandfather that since he had not attacked him today, he would leave the question unanswered. But his mercy did not extend to Lady Orly, because she had twice tried to kill his mother. First by poisoning her, and then by sending assassins to their home. He could not forgive the double attempt, and the woman would pay for her actions. At that moment, the man threw a dagger at the boy's back. But Riley dodged it with a calm face, and told the man not to try to avenge his defeat today. The father and daughter were stunned that he was able to dodge, and the next moment, the woman was screaming for everyone to attack him now. She screamed for them to kill him, and wipe him off the face of the earth by tearing him to pieces. The mercenaries rushed at the boy, and he fended them off with a wooden sword, reminiscing about old times. He once spared the assassins because he thought they were ordinary people, but he was a naive fool. The boy cut down 4 attackers with one swing of his sword. With a smile on his face, he told others that he was no longer the man he was in his past life. The woman's father watched in horror as the boy, who had only trained with a sword once before, killed with a practiced version. Riley went up to him and told him that he had just had his second experience, and that since the old man was a warrior, he would die quickly. The man fell to his knees and begged the young gentleman for forgiveness, begging him to take only his life. Begging not to harm his daughter, he insisted that she was not a bad person and just fell into bad company. But the boy refused him, and the next moment he struck. Riley's body was different in this life. He had been resting from fighting for 19 years, and his hand was now trembling. The boy clenched his hand into a fist and decided not to give in to emotions anymore. Meanwhile, it was already dawn and Sarah's maid was panicking. She asked Jan if he had found the young master. He was too defenseless, and she guessed that he had been kidnapped by the assassins. But Greybeard was sure that he was just hiding somewhere again, as he always did. But the girl insisted that this was a different case, because he had been in the room with Lady Iris and then disappeared. The old man got tired of the chatter and decided to make his rounds again, and the maid decided to do the same and was about to leave. But the Count was standing on the balcony, and the girl froze when she met his eyes. He asked why he had not been informed of his son's disappearance. Jan said that their young master was already out of favor because of his laziness and indifference to battles. So he was worried about what the Count would say if he found out that he had also been kidnapped. The Count was overcome with anger and ordered not to even look for him, because it was an incredible shame. His family does not need those who cannot defend themselves. At that very moment, a boy appeared and asked who was calling him. The old man and the girl were happy to see him, and Ian rushed to hug him. Sarah slapped him on the back of the head and yelled at him for not realizing how worried they were about him. The boy liked the hug better and would not have minded if the girl had done it too. The Count called his son and told him to go to his office. The father asked if he had really found the note, but the next moment Lloyd attacked the boy screaming. His mother ordered Riley to get out of the mansion, and he miraculously found the paper. The boy pretended not to understand, but this only made his brother even angrier. Lloyd accused him of forging the note and demanded an honest confession. Riley denied it, and the next moment his brother tried to push him, but he dodged and hoped that he didn't notice. Lloyd continued to yell and demanded to know what game he was playing with them, and Riley clenched his fist because he was not going to tolerate provocation. His father ordered them to stop, and his brother tried to argue, but his father wasn't going to say it twice. He said that poisoning the soup and inviting the assassins to the estate was her doing, and it had already been proven. The man turned to Riley and said that this was not an interrogation, but he needed to know where the paper came from, because it could not have fallen from the sky. The boy replied that even if they didn't believe him, he was able to fight off the attacker who came for his mother. Lloyd looked at him in surprise, and the boy continued to tell them that they probably knew about his training a few days ago. Although he was not good at holding a weapon, when the assassin attacked him in the corridor, he managed to fight him off with a wooden sword and escape. When the boy returned, the attacker was already dead, and he had this note in his hand. From this story, his father realized that Orly had let him in. Lloyd tried to deny it, and insisted that she would not do that. The father said that, although he could hardly believe it, it was she who let the murderers in, and that is why he had to drive her out. It was getting late, and the Count ordered his sons to leave. The boys agreed and were about to leave, but the father told Riley to come back tomorrow because they needed to talk in private. On his way out of his father's office, Riley met his oldest brother and tried to talk to him, but he ignored him. Leaving the two idiots alone, he moved on. Lloyd asked Lion what he thought about all this, and he said that it was unlikely that the youngest was lying. No matter how bitter he was about his mother, they shouldn't let their emotions get the better of them in a situation like this. In a way, Lion was grateful to Riley, if you think about the killers in their house. Lloyd didn't understand what he was saying, but his brother said that even though she was their mother, he couldn't forgive someone for murder. A contract killing was a crime, and there was no excuse. Lloyd asked if he really believed their mother was guilty, but he put his hand on his brother's head with a smile on his face, and said that for now, they would leave it at that. The time would come when the heir to the house would be elected, and after he was elected, they would be able to avenge their mother. These words brought tears to the middle brother's eyes with joy. The elder brother promised to restore order to the house after he received the right to investigate. And although the youngest was a lazy bum, his father had hopes for him in spite of this, and he could not be ignored. Wiping away tears of happiness, Lloyd understood and agreed with his idea. In the morning, Jan stood in front of the boy. He had everything in his hands to bring the boy to a normal appearance for the audience with the Count. He combed and rubbed the boy's hair to shine. When he was done, he said that the young gentleman looked 10 years younger, but the boy did not really want to look like a 10-year-old boy. Ian was delighted with the situation. He believed that Lady Orley's expulsion opened the door to his succession. Riley tried to run away from his admonitions, but the old man continued to chase him down the hall. He thought that maybe his father had called him to evaluate his skills and talents. The old man always said that the boy was the most talented of his brothers. Riley knocked and entered, and his father immediately told him to get ready to go, which stunned the boy. The man tossed his son a personalized invitation to the 17th Royal Tournament in a month. The boy thought that even though he was the only one who could participate in this tournament, his father could have started the conversation in a different way, instead of kicking him out of the house. Riley laughed in confusion and asked what he should do about it, because his father should know his response to an invitation of this kind. The man said he needed experience, and his brothers had already been to such tournaments. The boy replied that he didn't need that experience, and that since his brothers had already participated, they should go again. The man emphasized that it was a personalized invitation, and since he did not understand, his father explained to him that the letter was a declaration of love. This news did not amuse the boy, and he tried even harder to refuse. He said that he would not go and would not participate in the tournament because he was not good at anything. His father had already grabbed his head and asked him not to try his patience. But Riley reminded his father of the last time he tried to swing a wooden sword and his mother almost had a heart attack. Her reaction should have been seen. He asked his father not to force him, because it would not work anyway, and he did not want to pick up the sword. But his father said in a firm voice that he could do it, and the boy fell into memories where he was told the same thing. There, he was a soldier and a warrior, a chosen one, without whom nothing would work. The boy had to fight for his home and nothing else. When he regained consciousness, he told his father not to look at him like that. He would not participate anyway. The father got up and went to his son, saying that this time it was impossible to refuse, because he now had responsibilities and simply had no choice. The boy must defend the family name in this tournament. Riley started to back away. He didn't understand why he had to defend anything. Opening the door with his back, he slammed it into the old man, who was listening in. He made excuses that he was just cleaning the place, but the boy was not up to it and ran away. The Count ordered the old man to chase him. The boy hid in a closet and wondered why he needed the memory of his previous life, and how he was lucky to be born into a family of swordsmen. He understood the motives of his father, who wanted to pass on his craft to his son, but literally everyone in this house was skilled with a sword, including the maids. Only a few phrases from his past life made him go sour. He did not understand why he was being punished. The next moment, he heard Sarah looking for him, asking his mother where he might be. The Count hadn't spoken to him, and the tournament was coming up, and he was counting on his participation, but he had simply run away. The girl asked the lady if she knew about the rumors that her son would not be the heir, if she was not concerned. Iris replied that she was worried about it, and believed that he would be fine. He would sometimes look at her with an incredibly sad look and always say that nothing had happened and she had nothing to worry about. Although her son has changed a lot, and she doesn't understand him, she is his mother and will do everything she can. Even when everyone is tired of his inaction, she will continue to love and support him. The woman just wanted Riley to be happy. She asked the maid if he was not boring her with his laziness, and they laughed together. Lady Iris asked the maid to help her because she wanted to move to another room, to which Sarah agreed and went to resolve the issue. When she was sure the maid was gone, she knocked on the closet and asked if Riley was hiding there again. The boy was surprised at his discovery, and the next moment made an excuse that he just wanted to be alone, which made his mother laugh. She told him that he could not hide forever. He had already done so at the time of the assassin's attack, and everyone was very worried about him. The mother asked him why he wanted to be alone and asked about the tournament. The boy replied that the mere thought of a weapon in his hand terrified him. The woman asked if he would go if he was accompanied by a beautiful lady. To his surprise, she replied that she would go with him. When Jan finished preparing the carriage, he asked if the lady had taken everything for the trip, and she asked if Jan and Sarah had everything they needed. Sarah said that it would be good to take at least 2 more people with them, but the boy replied that they were both enough, because he knew how fast they were. The Count arrived just before they were to leave. He took his beloved by the hands, and told her that she did not have to go with him. But she said she had already promised, and this was her first trip with her son. He touched her face to say goodbye, and she asked him not to delay it because it might upset someone. But he said that it would be good if no one upset him. The woman thought that he was jealous, but he realized that this was the only condition under which the boy agreed to participate in the tournament. The woman didn't want to argue anymore, and went to the carriage. The Count ordered his subordinates to save the lives of his wife and son at the cost of their own, and Sarah and Jan swore to fulfill their duty to the last drop of blood. They said goodbye to the Count, and the carriage moved off. Lady Iris shouted the word Solalo and was very happy about it, because she had not used it for a long time. The boy asked what it meant, and his mother replied that it was the name of their estate. Riley didn't know that this place had a special name, and the woman said that her father built the estate, and it was named after him. Eris asked the maid if she was born in Solia and in which district, and she said that she was in the right district. The territory of the Solalo estate was divided into left, right, and front Solia, with the castle in the center and a protective wall behind it. Sarah was telling the boy that Solia was a whole kingdom in one city. The girl said that there was something in Solia that was very similar to the drink the young man had mentioned so often. She tried to remember what he called it, but just started describing its properties. It was a drink that gave a pleasant tingling sensation to the tongue, and it tasted even better with ice. It was a heavenly refreshing drink, just as the boy had said. Riley stood up and shouted for details, and she called it the drink of the gods, sweet as wine without being intoxicating, and the color blacker than black. Riley remembered the name himself. His eyes lit up, and he shouted the word cola. The boy asked if this drink was really available in Solia, and the girl asked if he meant a non-alcoholic wine. Lady Iris was surprised to hear what he was talking about, and whether the girl had decided to drink it, and she replied that even small children drink this soft drink. The boy thought that if this drink was really available in Solia, then he should definitely go there, because he hadn't had it for almost 20 years. The next moment, the carriage stopped abruptly. Ian shouted about the attack, and goblins with shields and sticks were already coming at them. Riley thought that if they were simple goblins, Sarah could easily deal with them, and he wouldn't have to intervene. The old man was shouting that they shouldn't be allowed to surround the carriage, and Riley was nervously biting his nails. He watched the girl work, and although she was good at her job and had powerful blows, she was doing everything too slowly. He couldn't wait to try the coke, and now thought he should have taken more guards. There were more and more goblins, and Sarah was too slow, which made the boy go crazy and shout that he would do everything himself. The next moment, the boy was already near the girl, and she asked him how he got here and asked him to get back to the carriage quickly. But Riley was already in front of her with swords in his hands, asking why she didn't use her legs during the fight. He had just had a chance to try a coke, but because of the number of goblins and her slowness, everything would be closed and he would not be able to buy anything. The boy was eager to fight and said that if he just drew a circle and did not go beyond it, his movements would be fragmentary and not as effective, which would drag out the battle. He wielded both swords like a master, cutting goblins in half, talking about the need to keep a distance and attack the enemy with sudden short attacks. He kept saying that if he didn't deal with them quickly, they wouldn't see the day. The boy ordered Sarah to watch and learn, while he rushed from goblin to goblin and emphasized that it was faster and even easier. Sarah and Ian were just stunned to see his sudden bloody massacre, and how he calmly ended the fight and easily suggested that they continue on their way. The carriage moved on, and it was already getting dark. I asked the lady if she knew about the skills of the young gentleman, who was now sleeping peacefully, drooling. The woman said she didn't know anything about swords and all that stuff. She was just glad the boy wasn't hurt. The mother stroked her son's hair and said that she was very scared for him when he rushed at the goblins. Ian wanted to say something else, but Iris asked them to keep the situation a secret, even from the Count himself. The carriage reached the settlement in the morning, and Sarah welcomed the young Lord to Solia and was glad to be here, because she hadn't been to her homeland for a long time. Iris said that it had been a bad thing with Jan, whom they had sent to the castle of Solia alone, but the girl replied that it was for the best, because the old man would have been talking about those goblins all day, not lagging behind the boy for a second. And they had to follow the traditions of this city, namely eating, drinking, and having fun. She asked with joy where they would start, and the boy immediately replied with enthusiasm that they would start with cola, that black sweet non-alcoholic wine. The view of the whole city with dense buildings, decorated with colorful ribbons, and a tall fortress behind it, opened up before them. Sarah suggested they go to a cafe she frequented. They were sure to sell what they were looking for and would be able to hide from the sun. From behind the building, a man watched the trio, ordering the dark-haired girl to act and work for her bread, calling her a bastard of the magic tower. In front of him stood a long-haired girl in torn clothes, half of her face covered with either burns or scales. Riley was slamming his drink on the table with glee, tears welling up in his eyes. He had no idea that cola really existed in this world, and thought he would never try it again. He could not forget its fantastic coolness, and the tingling sensation that burned his throat. He stood up and overturned his chair and shouted enthusiastically that it was just right, attracting the attention of passers-by with his shouts. Iris and Sarah were surprised by his behavior, and the boy asked for permission to have another cup. The maid looked at him as if he were an old drunkard. But the next moment there was shouting behind them. The dark-haired girl shouted that she hadn't done anything, and the man who grabbed her arm told her not to pay attention because they had just caught a thief. Sarah couldn't just listen to the cries for help from this innocent girl and was about to attack the men. But Riley grabbed her hand and forbade her to do so. He knew it was an act. He told her to just relax and ignore it, which surprised the girl. Riley explained that these three were only looking at her sword, whereas if she was really looking for help, the thief would have to look in all directions for a savior. The boy serenely held his cudgel and asked the maid not to get involved in unnecessary problems. When he came to the chambers in the evening, Jam was already waiting for him, muttering something about wanting to do things his way and take part in the duel. The man tilted his glass and slammed it on the table, telling about his adventures in the castle of Solia. The gray-bearded man was buying 4 tickets to a fencing match. The saleswoman asked him where he came from, and when she heard about the county of Ippolita, she enthusiastically clarified whether it was true. The man handed her a letter from the clan with the count's seal on it. After reading it, the girl wanted to give out 4 tickets to participate in the duel. But Jan apologized and said that the seats should be for spectators. The girl then shouted in surprise what it meant for spectators, and now it moved the man to tears. He was beating his hands on the bed like a small child, and the boy didn't even know what to say. But the man continued, because that was not all. While the saleswoman was fiddling with the tickets, an old friend noticed him and greeted him with joy. Jan barely recognized the tall blond man and asked if he was really Schneider. The blond man asked about his life and whether he had also come to participate in the fencing competition. Schneider guessed that the old man had never married, and the man told him that he was just a butler at the Appellati estate. Hearing this, Billy immediately began to ask whom he served there. Was it the sharp sword of Lion, or maybe the swift Lloyd, or even the Count himself? He smiled and said that at his age, the answer was probably the Count. Without responding to the question, Ian asked the saleswoman when he would receive his tickets. Schneider was surprised to see the audience tickets, and the girl behind the counter mentioned that it seems the Count has a 3rd son, whose name was Riley. The blond man picked up on it, saying he had heard his other name, that he was called a lazy sword because of his carelessness. Ian was now sobbing in the chamber, and telling how ashamed he was. He could not bear to be humiliated in front of his old friend. The latter looked at him with such pity that the old mercenary hero of the past felt like crying. Greybeard could have told his old friend about the goblins, but Mrs. Iris had forbidden him to, and the situation was too unfair. In the morning, Sarah asked how the boy slept, and he looked so bad that he scared his mother. The boy said that he didn't think he should have come here, but the maid reminded him of the start of the competition tomorrow, which she was looking forward to because she had never seen it before. Rayleigh didn't want to hear about it, and just wanted to go home. He told how Jan had gotten drunk and kept saying the same thing in a circular pattern every half hour all night. The boy asked where they were going today, and Sarah said they were going to Provia Solia. Riley asked why exactly to the right, to which the girl replied that they didn't have enough time because the tournament started tomorrow, but the boy was interested in Lower Salt, which was obviously closer. Jen replied that it was dangerous and even dirty there, and the maid agreed and said that it was not the best place, even though she was from there. The boy had no particular desire to go there, so Sarah took them to explore the town. They crossed the threshold of the gates of the Temple of Solia, in the center of which stood a large statue of a hooded woman. This was the place where the goddess Irene worshipped and received her blessing. The wounded and sick were healed here, and the oracles received inspiration for their predictions. Once upon a time, Lady Irene was seriously ill, and now she came to express her gratitude to the priest who healed her. The boy looked around the temple, which did not stand out from similar places. The same parishioners and the same worship. And although they said that the goddess gave people the gift of prophecy, the boy did not understand how someone would give up their whole life and become a monk for this. Meanwhile, the priest his mother was talking to was happy for her, and said that she must be protected by the goddess Irene herself. Riley decided to explore the other parts of the temple, as it looked like his mother was going to be here for a long time. Ian noticed the beautiful architecture of this place, for which people came here from faraway places. The boy recalled how in his previous life he had met the saint in the same church, and as soon as she saw him, she immediately called him the chosen one of the Holy Sword. And from that moment on, his life changed a lot. Now this temple reminded him of his past life and how he managed to pick up that sword. When he reached the figure of the saint, the boy saw a nun kneeling in front of her. She immediately stood up and greeted the guests, saying that she was honored to meet the one who had been gifted by the gods, and welcomed them to the Temple of Solia. Jen greeted her and demanded that the boy do the same, but for some reason he stood silently by. The boy did not understand why he had to do this, but if she wanted to do it, he should first show his face hidden behind his cassock. The boy's words attracted the attention of the temple's parishioners, and the old man said that they had an important person in front of him. But Riley replied that he was also an important person, and the nun found this interesting and showed his face. Ian immediately recognized Saint Frisia and bowed to her, and apologized for not recognizing her immediately. Before them was the youngest of the holy virgins of the temple of Solia, and Jan demanded that the boy finally greet her. But the boy only mumbled about the same custom of worshipping living saints in this place. The boy told him not to pay attention to his words. He was talking to himself. Riley did not particularly like saints, rather he disliked them, and they even disgusted him. The boy recalled how the previous saint had proclaimed that he had been chosen by a sword and told him to take it and destroy the demon king. She said that only a warrior chosen by God could do this, and everyone agreed with her, even he. It was as if he was their only hope and savior, but now the boy did not understand how he could have fallen for it so easily. Now Riley just turned around and walked away. Jan whispered and asked him to at least show her his face so she could remember it. But he said out loud that the more he looked at her, the more he lost his appetite. Hearing this, the girl was outraged and followed them with her eyes. But the next moment she moved forward and asked him to wait for her. The boy was already wondering what she was going to say, and if she was going to pull out another sacred sword and talk about another demon king. The girl asked him to bend down a little and whispered something in his ear. The boy pulled away from her and asked why she was interested in such things. She judged by his reaction and thought she was right. Riley didn't understand why she would even bring it up, and she noticed his flaccid reaction at the sight of her face. The two of them were screaming at the top of their lungs, which made the patrons go crazy. The boy said that it was not proper for saints to talk about such things, but the girl was proud that she was still the youngest of them, and it was natural to be proud of that. The boy falsely praised her and told her that she could think whatever she wanted, and when she asked him why he was calling her by her first name, he said that her imaginary sainthood did not matter to him. He asked the old man if he was supposed to fall to his knees now, and if that was what was expected of him. The girl's gaze kept dropping to the floor, and Riley continued to tell her how much he hated them, which attracted even more attention from the others. He suggested that the girl go their separate ways and not annoy each other. Tears were welling up in the girl's eyes, and she could hardly contain herself. The monks offered her handkerchiefs, but she waved them away and refused. Riley asked what had happened to her. She was so sure of her sainthood. The girl blushed and tried to stop such communication with her, because it was already sacrilege. But the boy said that he had no religion and that she shouldn't call him a heathen by starting it. Riley told the old man that they shouldn't stay here and should leave. The monks comforted the girl, and she did not understand how she could have been told all this. One of them said that not all people like saints, but she didn't appreciate the support, and then the monks asked her to ignore his words. He was just another ill-mannered gentleman, but this only made the girl think that they thought the same about her. The monk assured her that she was the most holy after the goddess Irene, and possibly her incarnation in flesh and blood. The girl was already calming herself down and telling herself to stop thinking about him and go back to praying. But the next moment, it was as if she had been electrocuted, and she looked again at the boy leaving the church. She froze and could not believe it could be him. Jan asked the young man what the saint had asked him. The girl wondered if he didn't like men, but he told the old man that she was asking about his preferences. The man asked what it meant, but Riley said it was not important, and that it was simply not worth messing with the saints.